here speaking with you at Circle's Edge about one of my favorite topics, joy through synchronicity and serendipity. In the course of our lives, most of us have come across uncanny coincidences or unusual happenings that cannot be explained by reason or logic or science. And when these happenings occur, we can't help but take notice. For example, one day out of the blue, you find yourself thinking about someone from the past who you haven't spoken to in maybe 10 years. You say to yourself, gee, I wonder how Jack is doing. And then you wonder, why am I even thinking of Jack? Well, later on that day, guess what happens? Yeah. You go to your Facebook page or you go to LinkedIn and find out that Jack wants to connect with you. What a strange coincidence. Or is it? Now, before rushing to judgment, know that this is not woo-woo. It is an actual phenomenon discovered by the great Swiss psychotherapist Carl Jung. Back in the 1920s is when it was discovered. Dr. Jung brought this unusual happening of uncanny coincidences into our vocabulary and called it synchronicity. Now, the dictionary defines synchronicity as the coincidental occurrence of events, and especially psychic events, that cannot be explained by cause and effect. In other words, nothing visible or known to science caused a certain event to happen. Nothing caused you to think of Jack on the same day he is looking to connect with you on social media, and especially after 10 years. In the course of his career, Dr. Jung noticed this type of uncanny coincidence in his practice as a psychotherapist. While working with his patients, he scrutinized numerous examples of synchronicity. And of course, he documented every single one of them. But there's more. For Dr. Jung, this whole experience became spiritual. Bearing witness to synchronicity brought him to a belief in the ultimate oneness of the universe through his two lenses of science and spirituality. He perceived that physical matter and consciousness are interconnected. Now, Dr. Jung was fascinated by the notion that our life's experiences were not a series of random events. And over time, he determined that what happens in our lives is about a deeper underlying order to the universe, which can include spiritual awakening. Now, Dr. Jung believed that the observation of synchronicity could create a shift in consciousness. He said that by nature, we humans live in egocentric thinking. No, that's not true about us, is it?
No.
How shocking. In other words, I, me, and all the blah, 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 blah that goes with it. Familiar, right? But, he said, that when you become an observer of synchronistic happenings, a shift takes place whereby you become aware of something bigger. And this something bigger could mean an ever-expanding universe, or the conception of something bigger than ourselves, or perhaps the vision of a greater whole. So it helps us get out of ourselves. Now, this term, greater whole, brings to mind the theory that everything in the universe is connected. Most of us have heard the theory of a holographic universe. Who's heard about a holographic universe? Wow, just every hand went up. Co-pioneered by an American-born British physicist named David Bond. Now, when viewing the universe as a hologram, it becomes holographic, or a picture of the whole in one living entity. There's no separation between one part or another. The hologram contains all the information of the whole. Everything is a universal continuum and connected in some way. Clearly, the concept of a holographic universe echoes synchronicity. And through synchronistic experiences, we open the door to catch a glimpse of the holographic universe at work by witnessing the interconnectedness of matter and mind. We come to realize that our human thought processes, which draw us to synchronistic events, are much more intertwined with the physical world than we could have imagined. Our thoughts are intertwined with the physical world, for sure. For example, the next account of synchronicity could have easily happened to you or someone you know. Jason and Kimberly were meeting at a popular happy hour where they both needed to find parking spaces. And when Jason arrived, all the spaces were filled. So he wanted to tip off Kimberly that the spaces were filled. So he picked up his smartphone, he sent a text message to Kimberly to tip her off about the situation, about the parking. Well, Kimberly was already there in a different part of the parking lot. And not knowing that Jason had already arrived, she picked up her smartphone to get in touch with him. Well, you can guess the rest. As soon as she picked up her phone, there was the incoming text message from Jason. Sound familiar? Of course it does. Or how about a similar situation? During his break at work, Tim decides to call his dad. When he picks up his desk phone, there was no dial tone because his dad was already there on the other line calling him. Very common occurrence. How many of you can relate to these types of experiences? Absolutely. So here's the big question. Why did Jason and Kimberly, as well as Tim and his dad, connect the way they did, and so instantaneously? My sense is that there was a connection, an energy exchange, a type of telepathic synchronicity, where Jason and Kimberly, as well as Tim and his dad, recognized each other's energies and thoughts at the same time. Now, truly, by opening up our channels to synchronistic events, we draw to us a positive energy field whereby more and more of this type of thing happens. Plus, by law of attraction, more of what we desire begins to come our way. The Celestine Prophecies is a great book about highlighting numerous narratives about synchronicity. James Redfield, the author, said that meaningful coincidences are tiny miracles steering us toward the good life and showing us that there is another side of life that we have yet to discover. In other words, there is some other process operating behind the scenes. And he goes on to say that these meaningful coincidences are always seeking first to awaken us and then to allow us to be guided by a spiritual connection. Now let's explore that a little more. Guided a spiritual connection. For me, this brings to mind intuition. I feel that intuition is guidance from your higher self. And your higher self is the God in you, the indwelling spirit, where all the answers are. And when you communicate with your higher self, you live in your field of pure potentiality, where all things are possible. Now, all of this reminds us of the yearly theme for Centers for Spiritual Living, which is awakening. Because, first of all, trusting in your higher self demonstrates the courage to be your own person. As intuitional guidance pours through us, we become less and less wrapped up in the mainstream way of doing things. Like, for example, all of us. Are we mainstream? No, not even close. And more importantly, we transcend being influenced by the voices of others. We become awakened to our own voice. The voice of our higher self, where all the answers are. Being in New Thought, we have heard consistently that living in the now is a fundamental tenet for the raising up of consciousness. The now keeps us in the flow. So here's the connection with synchronicity. When we embrace the phenomenon of synchronicity, we are 10 times more open to whatever comes along in the moment, which keeps us in the flow. According to many spiritual teachers, the present moment is truly where spirit resides. James Redfield talks about how the magic of synchronicity has a positive effect of raising our vibration. And as we experience an uptick in our own vibrational frequency, by default, that positive energy goes out and touches everyone. We are all connected, and what we say and do stimulates a chain reaction. Synchronicity shows us a lot about our interconnectedness. As part of the first insight in the Celestine prophecies, Redfield says, quote, "I don't think that anything happens by coincidence. No one is here by accident. Everyone who crosses our path has a message for us. Otherwise, they would have taken another path, or left earlier, or later. The fact that these people are here means that they are in our lives for some reason." End quote. One thing I personally like about noticing synchronicities is that it keeps us buoyant and versatile, not to mention more curious and welcoming of what's new and different. Now, on balance, this type of engagement can actually have a healing effect. And before you know it, there's a melting away of those old habits or situations that might not have been for your highest good. Being in the flow of the moment and inviting synchronistic happenings keeps us fresh and in the flow of life. And as we move through that flow, everything starts to click. Click, click, click. Now, Steve Redfield comments further by saying, quote, "These coincidences are happening more and more frequently. And when they do, they strike us as beyond what would be expected by pure chance. They feel destined, as though our lives have been guided by some unexplained force. And the experience includes a feeling of mystery and excitement, and as a result, we feel more alive." End quote. And one of my favorite favorite stories of synchronicity happened to an acquaintance of mine, who for today we shall call Sarah. Sarah was on her yearly pilgrimage to Burning Man with her fiancé and a few friends. And even though Sarah and her friends were all born in the 80s, they loved the rock music of the 60s. And after getting settled in at Burning Man, Sarah turns to her friends and says, "Oh, I just have to have the Doors around me." Anyone familiar with the Doors from the 60s? Oh, good, a few hands. Yay, found it. Jim Morrison. Mm-hmm. So she starts singing Doors songs. Just singing. Didn't have any equipment with her to play. She was singing them. And while she's singing these songs, a van playing music approaches her campsite. And out of all the rock groups of the 60s, who do you think the van is playing while Sarah is singing? The Doors, of course. But with even more synchronicity at play, the song coming from the van, can you guess it? Is exactly the same song Sarah was singing when the van entered her campsite. Now talk about a 2-for-1 of synchronicity. Oh, pretty astounding and fun too. Today, we're also talking about serendipity. So what's the difference? In general, well, there really isn't a lot. Serendipity is the act of making a fortunate discovery by accident. Fortunate discovery by accident, or finding something valuable or delightful when you aren't looking for it. Sound familiar, folks? Especially with certain relationships I know about in this room. One thing I've noticed about synchronicity is that it does put you into a fluid frame of mind, which lays a foundation for attracting not only more synchronicity, but also serendipity. And almost like synchronicity, serendipity gives rise to that wonderful feeling of what can happen. Like synchronicity, serendipity encompasses a very broad tent. And throughout history, there are countless themes of serendipity in medical breakthroughs and scientific discoveries or inventions, such as with the invention of a product that we see in countless items every day. In fact, this product is so common that it might even be attached to something you're wearing or carrying today. Well, that product is Velcro. It's on my boots, which arose out of a serendipitous event of making a fortunate discovery by accident. The story goes like this. The hook loop fastener Velcro was invented in 1948 by a Swiss electrical engineer named George de Mestral. The idea came to him via an accidental and chance observation. One day, after returning from a hunting trip with his dog, he noticed a coarse weed called a cockleburr sticking to his clothes and to his dog's fur. So while picking them off his cloth jacket, he noticed that the cockleburrs didn't come up all that easily. And this piqued his curiosity. He's an engineer, right? So they want to know how things work. So he took one of the cockleburrs and examined it under a microscope. And under the microscope, he discovered that his coarse weed was covered with hooks that caught on anything with a loop. Get the picture? See it in your mind's eye? Now listen carefully to the next few words, which are totally new thought. He imagined the possibility of binding two materials that could stick together with the hooks and loops model and then be pulled apart. And voila, Velcro was born. Now, after developing the product, George named it Velcro, which comes from the blend of two French words, one being velours, which means velvet, and the other crochet, which means hook. So blending the two words together, velours and crochet, you get Velcro. Pretty nifty. Even thought of a cool name. In 1999, George DeMestral was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. And there's a story going around that at one point, he gave advice to the executives of Velcro saying, quote, "If any of your employees ask for a 2-week holiday to go hunting, say yes." End quote. Fantastic story. I believe that every bit of synchronicity and serendipity is good for the soul because, well, it's fun and provides a healthy vehicle for raising our spirits. Spiritual teachers say that at core, our true essence is that of joy, which means that feeling happy brings us into alignment with our natural state. Another thing I like about synchronicity and serendipity is the constant reminder that we matter, that we are not forgotten in this universe. In the back of our minds, we know mentally that on a spiritual level that we matter because we're a part of God. But this very concept can feel abstract because it stems from our thinking side. But the good news is that in our humanness, we also have feelings. And I believe that it's in the feeling realm where the wonder of little miracles take root. One reason my feelings are so valuable. Embracing magical happenings is a healthy, feel-good thing that raises our vibration. And as that spiritual connection is made, we know with certainty how much we truly do matter in this universe. Now, in this next story, listen for the themes of both synchronicity and serendipity. It's about Carlo and Monica. They were celebrating their 18th wedding anniversary. Over the course of the weekend, they wanted to go dining at their favorite eateries. Not just one, but several. And during one of the dines, Carlo pointed out that the clarinet player hired by the restaurant was playing their wedding song. Now, over the years, Carlo and Monica rarely heard their wedding song anywhere or on the radio or on TV. So what a treat it was to hear that song again after 18 years, and especially during their anniversary weekend. Well, it even gets better for Monica and Carlo when he shares something about himself that she didn't know. In high school, he too, Carlo, had played the clarinet, just like the musician in the restaurant that very day. Obviously, this story is a perfect mix of serendipity and synchronicity. So to conclude, I encourage you to be mindful of all the little synchronicities and serendipities that cross your path. Why? Well, not only is it fun, but it also stretches us. And it cracks us open to what is possible. I gave a very abbreviated version of this speech to a mainstream group. And I said the same thing. It stretches us and cracks us open to what is possible. And they were very welcoming.
Wow.
It happens everywhere. This is a great subject matter to open ourselves up. I am convinced that by honoring the principles of synchronicity and serendipity, we automatically become explorers. And if you already are an explorer, it'll make you even a more expanded explorer. And like other explorers, we step into that never-ending field of possibilities. Now, going forward, I wish